Play is often misunderstood because people tend to judge it by its appearance rather than by its function. They see laughter and assume entertainment. They see curiosity and assume distraction. They see enjoyment and assume escape. Yet many of the most important movements within a life begin disguised as something light enough to avoid resistance. What appears playful on the surface often carries information that would have been rejected had it arrived wearing the language of duty. You can observe this in childhood before the world begins assigning value according to productivity. A child can spend hours arranging objects, building imaginary worlds, drawing patterns, inventing stories, or exploring questions that seem to have no practical purpose. From the outside, it appears inefficient. Yet beneath the visible activity, something far more important is occurring. Identity is discovering itself through attraction long before it possesses the language to describe what it is finding. This is why genuine play feels different from distraction, even when the two appear similar from a distance. Distraction pulls attention away from the self. Play pulls attention deeper into the self. Both may involve enjoyment. Both may involve immersion. Yet one leaves a person feeling emptied while the other leaves them feeling strangely expanded. One consumes energy while the other reveals energy that was already waiting beneath the surface. Many people stop recognizing this distinction as they grow older. They become so accustomed to evaluating everything through outcomes that they lose sensitivity to the subtle intelligence hidden within enjoyment itself. They begin asking whether something is useful before asking whether something is alive. They begin measuring value before noticing resonance. Over time, this creates a strange condition where a person becomes highly efficient at moving through life while becoming increasingly disconnected from the signals that might have shown them where they actually belong. Serelune'Vaehri observes this condition with great patience because it is not created through malice. Most people are taught from an early age that seriousness equals importance. The more serious something appears, the more legitimate it seems. The more effort it requires, the more valuable it is assumed to be. Yet reality repeatedly demonstrates that some of the deepest transformations enter quietly through fascination rather than struggle. The doorway often appears too small because the mind expects significance to arrive through force. Think about the moments that changed your life unexpectedly. Often they did not begin as grand decisions. They began as simple attractions. A book that captured your attention for reasons you could not explain. A conversation that lingered in memory longer than expected. A hobby that seemed insignificant until years later when its influence became visible. At the time, these experiences rarely announce themselves as turning points. They simply feel interesting. This reveals something important about the architecture of becoming. Human beings often imagine that purpose appears fully formed and then directs behavior. Yet lived experience frequently unfolds in the opposite direction. Behavior begins moving toward what feels alive, and only later does understanding arrive. The path becomes visible because it is being walked. Meaning emerges because participation creates perspective. What felt random begins revealing coherence only after enough distance has accumulated. There is a practical reason for this. If complete understanding arrived before movement, most people would never begin. The mind prefers certainty. The unknown creates hesitation. Play provides a different mechanism. It allows movement without demanding complete comprehension. Curiosity becomes a bridge that carries a person across territory they would have avoided had they known how much change awaited them on the other side. This is why joy can function as a form of navigation, not because every pleasant feeling contains deep significance, but because genuine aliveness often signals compatibility between a person and an unfolding possibility. Something recognizes something. The attraction appears before the explanation. A subtle yes emerges before language organizes itself around the experience. The body frequently notices long before the intellect catches up. You may notice this pattern when learning a new skill. Certain subjects immediately generate energy. Hours pass unnoticed. Effort remains present, yet it feels different from obligation. The work continues requiring attention and discipline, but the relationship to that effort changes. Instead of pushing against resistance, the person feels pulled forward by interest. What appears from the outside as dedication often began as simple enjoyment. This creates an interesting paradox. The things that ultimately require the greatest commitment often begin as play. What later becomes mastery frequently begins as curiosity. What later becomes service often begins as fascination. The seed rarely resembles the tree. People searching only for grand beginnings may overlook the small invitations through which larger realities first become visible. There is another layer that becomes apparent when observing communities and cultures. Entire societies tend to reward what can be measured while overlooking what can only be experienced. As a result, many individuals learn to distrust enjoyment whenever it lacks immediate justification. They become uncomfortable with interests that do not produce obvious outcomes. Yet some of the most valuable dimensions of human life resist being reduced to metrics. Wonder cannot be quantified. Inspiration cannot be scheduled. Resonance refuses to fit neatly inside systems designed to measure efficiency. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means understanding that responsibility and play are not opposites. In healthy development, they become partners. Play discovers possibilities. Responsibility cultivates them. Curiosity opens doors. Commitment walks through them. One without the other creates imbalance. Endless play becomes drift, while endless obligation becomes exhaustion. Together, they create a movement that feels both alive and sustainable. As this understanding deepens, joy begins appearing less like a reward and more like information. Many people spend years believing they must earn joy after completing everything important. Yet, what if joy was helping identify what is important in the first place? What if some of the experiences that repeatedly attract your attention are not interruptions of your path, but glimpses of it? The question alone begins changing how ordinary moments are interpreted. A person might suddenly reconsider interests they dismissed years ago. They may notice recurring fascinations that never fully disappeared despite repeated attempts to outgrow them. They may recognize patterns connecting seamlessly unrelated chapters of life. Activities once judged as hobbies begin revealing themselves as clues. Enjoyment starts looking less accidental and more communicative. The scattered pieces begin forming relationships with one another. From this perspective, play is not the opposite of growth. It is one of growth's most overlooked expressions. It allows exploration before certainty. It permits movement before complete understanding. It creates conditions where new aspects of identity can emerge without being forced into premature definition. What appears light often carries remarkable depth when given enough time to unfold. And perhaps this is why the invitations that matter most are often the easiest to dismiss. They rarely arrive demanding attention. They arrive quietly, returning again and again through interest, fascination, delight, and curiosity. They wait without pressure. They reappear without resentment. And when a person finally begins paying attention, they often discover that what seemed like simple enjoyment was revealing a deeper pattern all along. A pattern that becomes clearer the longer one is willing to follow where genuine aliveness leads. For many people, the greatest obstacle to play is not a lack of opportunity. It is a belief about what play is supposed to look like. They imagine it must appear as recreation, entertainment, or leisure. They imagine it belongs in designated spaces separated from what they call real life. Because of this, they overlook the countless moments where play is already attempting to enter their experience through curiosity, experimentation, and exploration. The invitation is present, but it is disguised as something too ordinary to be recognized. You can see this whenever someone becomes interested in a question without knowing why. They begin reading, researching, observing, and connecting ideas that seem unrelated. No one assigned the task, no external reward has been promised, yet attention keeps returning to the subject as though some invisible thread is being followed. What appears to be intellectual curiosity is often a form of play occurring beneath the surface of thought. The same pattern appears in creativity. A person sits down to sketch, write, build, design, cook, rearrange a room, or experiment with a new skill. They may begin without a goal beyond seeing what happens. Yet through the act itself, something unexpected begins emerging. Possibilities become visible that did not exist before participation began. The discovery was not waiting at the end of the process. The discovery was generated by entering the process. This reveals an important principle that many people miss. Certain forms of knowledge cannot be received passively. They only appear through interaction. You cannot think your way into them before they exist because their existence depends upon your participation. The mind often wants certainty before movement, but some realities only become available after movement has already begun. Consider how often people ask what their purpose is while avoiding the activities that make them feel most alive. They hope for a complete answer before taking a step. They wait for certainty before allowing curiosity to matter. Yet the very experiences capable of revealing direction are frequently dismissed because they seem too small, too enjoyable, or too unrelated to the larger questions being asked. The search for significance sometimes blinds a person to the mechanisms through which significance arrives. This is where many lives become unnecessarily heavy, not because difficulty is unavoidable, but because aliveness becomes separated from responsibility. Work becomes one category, joy becomes another, growth becomes another, meaning becomes another. Yet reality rarely divides itself so cleanly. The deeper patterns often emerge when these categories begin overlapping in ways the mind did not expect. A person may discover that what they call joy is teaching them something about service. They may discover that what they call fascination is teaching them something about identity. They may discover that what they call play is teaching them something about contribution. The boundaries begin dissolving because the experiences were never as separate as they appeared. What looked like different movements were actually different expressions of the same movement. This is one reason genuine play often generates surprising levels of energy. When people engage with something that resonates deeply, fragmentation temporarily decreases. Internal conflict softens. Attention gathers itself naturally rather than being forced into concentration. Energy that was previously spent managing resistance becomes available for creation, learning, and exploration. The person feels more present because less of them is occupied with pushing against themselves. Many misunderstand this and assume the goal is to pursue whatever feels pleasant in the moment. Yet, pleasure and resonance are not identical. Pleasure can disappear as quickly as it arrives. Resonance has continuity. It returns, it persists, it continues calling attention back toward itself even after difficulty enters the experience. What begins as enjoyment gradually reveals a deeper relationship built upon meaning rather than mere stimulation. You may notice this in activities that continue attracting you despite challenges. There are moments when progress slows. There are moments when frustration appears. There are moments when competence has not yet caught up with aspiration, yet something keeps pulling you back. The attraction survives difficulty because the attraction was never dependent upon ease. It was connected to something more fundamental. This perspective changes how obstacles are interpreted. Instead of seeing resistance as proof that something is wrong, a person begins asking different questions. Does this resistance arise because the path lacks alignment or because growth is being requested? Is the difficulty draining vitality or is it demanding development? These questions matter because not all challenges carry the same meaning. Some indicate departure from resonance while others indicate deeper entry into it. When people learn to observe this distinction, they become less dependent upon external validation. They begin trusting direct experience more than inherited assumptions. They notice where energy expands and where it contracts. They notice which activities leave them feeling more connected to themselves and which leave them feeling increasingly distant. The feedback becomes experiential rather than conceptual. Understanding moves from theory into lived recognition. This shift creates a subtle form of freedom. Much of human behavior is organized around expectations inherited from families, cultures, institutions, and social environments. These influences are not inherently harmful. They often provide structure and stability, yet they can become restrictive when they disconnect people from their own direct experience of aliveness. A person may spend years pursuing goals that appear impressive while quietly wondering why fulfillment remains elusive. The question itself reveals something important. Fulfillment rarely emerges from achievement alone. Achievement can provide satisfaction. It can provide accomplishment. It can provide recognition. Yet fulfillment often arises when outer movement and inner resonance begin cooperating with one another. The experience feels different because the person is no longer living entirely from obligation. Something authentic is participating. Serelune'Vaehri points toward this cooperation repeatedly because it is easy to overlook. People are trained to notice effort. They are trained to notice sacrifice. They are trained to notice accomplishment. They are rarely trained to notice the intelligence hidden inside attraction. They are rarely taught that curiosity can function as guidance. They are rarely encouraged to trust what continues calling them forward without coercion. This becomes even more important when considering change. Many assume transformation begins with dramatic decisions. Sometimes it does. More often, it begins with repeated small moments of attention. A person follows an interest, then another, then another. Over time, these choices accumulate into a direction that only becomes visible in retrospect. What appeared random reveals continuity. What appeared playful reveals architecture. The remarkable thing is that this architecture rarely announces itself while it is being built. It grows quietly through participation. Each act of exploration contributes another piece. Each moment of curiosity expands the available landscape. Each experience of genuine engagement reveals something previously hidden. The person often believes they are simply enjoying themselves, only to discover later that enjoyment was teaching them how to recognize a path that could not have been explained before it was lived. And once this possibility is seen clearly, another question begins emerging naturally. If so much of life has been shaped by the interests, fascinations, and attractions that quietly followed you through the years, then it becomes worth looking more carefully at what continues returning now. Because some invitations do not disappear simply because they have not yet been understood. For many people, the deepest consequence of this realization is not that they begin playing more. The deeper consequence is that they begin listening differently. They stop treating attraction as a random emotional event and start observing it as information. They become curious about what repeatedly captures their attention without force. They notice which experiences continue returning after trends pass, circumstances change, and external rewards disappear. What survives all of that often deserves closer examination. This changes the relationship people have with recurring interests. Before, they may have viewed them as hobbies, preferences, or personal quirks. Afterward, they begin noticing that certain fascinations seem almost impossible to remove from their lives. They may set them aside for years and then discover them returning with the same vitality they possessed before. They may attempt to replace them with more practical pursuits, only to find themselves circling back once again. Something continues calling because something remains unfinished. Many assume that growth always involves becoming someone different. Yet, much of healthy development involves becoming more accurately yourself. The movement is not always toward addition. Sometimes it is toward recognition. What appears to be a new discovery may actually be a forgotten continuity. The interests that survive decades often survive because they are connected to aspects of identity deeper than temporary circumstances. You can observe this when people speak about moments that changed their lives. Rarely do they describe feeling completely unfamiliar with what they found. More often, they describe a strange sense of recognition. They say things like, "I always knew this mattered to me," or "I cannot explain why I was drawn to it." The language is revealing because it points towards remembrance rather than invention. Something felt familiar before it became fully understood. This is where the architecture of play becomes more profound than many initially realize. Play does not simply reveal possibilities in the external world. It reveals continuity within the internal world. It helps a person encounter aspects of themselves that cannot be accessed through obligation alone. Duty can produce achievement. Discipline can produce mastery. Yet play often reveals relationship. It shows a person what naturally comes alive when coercion is absent. This matters because many people spend years constructing lives based entirely upon what they believe they should value. They become skilled at meeting expectations. They become competent at fulfilling responsibilities. They become reliable, productive, and successful according to external measurements. Yet beneath those accomplishments, there can remain a persistent question that refuses to disappear. The question is not whether life is working. The question is whether life feels alive. The distinction is subtle but important. A life can function without flourishing. A person can perform without engaging. A schedule can be full while the spirit remains undernourished. From the outside, everything may appear stable. Yet internally, there is a growing distance between what is being lived and what is being felt. This distance often begins shrinking the moment genuine curiosity is allowed back into the conversation. Curiosity has an unusual quality because it rarely demands immediate commitment. It asks only for attention. It does not insist upon certainty. It does not require a complete life plan. It simply asks a person to move slightly closer and observe. In this way, curiosity creates opportunities that pressure often destroys. It allows exploration without demanding premature conclusions. You may notice how different this feels from the way many people approach important decisions. They often try to solve their entire future at once. They attempt to force clarity before enough experience exists to support it. They demand answers from questions that have not yet been lived. The result is frequently paralysis. The desire for certainty becomes the obstacle preventing discovery. Play operates through a different mechanism. Instead of demanding final answers, it encourages participation. Instead of requiring complete maps, it invites exploration of the next visible step. This may appear insignificant at first, yet entire lives can change because someone followed a small curiosity long enough to discover what was hidden behind it. The future often reveals itself incrementally because human beings learn incrementally. This perspective also transforms the way failure is interpreted. Within a playful relationship to life, every outcome becomes information. A person experiments. Something works or does not work. Understanding increases regardless. The experience contributes to clarity because participation generates knowledge that speculation alone cannot provide. What might have been labeled failure becomes part of an ongoing conversation with reality. Notice how different this is from living entirely through performance. Performance often creates fear because every outcome appears permanent. Every mistake feels costly. Every wrong turn feels threatening. Yet when exploration becomes part of the process, experience regains its educational value. The individual becomes less concerned with protecting an identity and more interested in discovering what is true. Serelune'Vaehri continually returns attention to this dynamic because emergence itself depends upon it. New possibilities rarely arrive fully developed. They appear as faint attractions, incomplete interest, unexpected curiosities, and seemingly insignificant moments of engagement. The mind often overlooks them because they lack dramatic presentation. Yet some of the most important developments in a life begin in exactly this manner. A person encounters an idea they cannot stop thinking about. They meet someone who expands their perspective. They explore a skill that generates unusual energy. They follow an interest that seems unrelated to their larger goals. None of these experiences appear transformative in isolation, yet over time they begin connecting. A pattern emerges that was invisible while the individual events were unfolding. The architecture becomes visible only because participation continued long enough for relationships to form. This is why joy should never be reduced to simple pleasure. Genuine joy contains orientation. It has direction. It reveals movement toward greater participation in life rather than withdrawal from it. The experience may feel light, yet the consequences can be substantial. Entire futures can emerge from moments that initially seem playful, ordinary, or unimportant. The deeper you observe this principle, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss the invitations that continue returning. Certain interests remain present. Certain questions refuse to disappear. Certain forms of creativity continue asking for expression. Certain experiences generate a feeling of aliveness that no amount of reasoning can fully explain. Eventually, a person must decide whether these recurring signals deserve attention. Not because every attraction contains a destiny, not because every curiosity contains a grand purpose, but because learning to recognize what genuinely brings you alive may be one of the most practical forms of wisdom available. The alternative is often spending years searching for meaning while ignoring the places where meaning has already been quietly introducing itself. And perhaps that is the smile hidden within the teaching of Serelune'Vaehri. The path does not always arrive as an instruction. Sometimes it arrives as a fascination. It arrives as a question you enjoy exploring. It arrives as a creativity you cannot quite leave alone. It arrives as something that seems too simple to matter until one day you realize it has been guiding you for much longer than you ever suspected. And there is still more to discover by following where that aliveness continues to lead.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.